In the near future, it will probably be common to interact with 3D images on our computers, maybe in virtual reality, maybe to prepare them for 3D printing. But first, you need to be able to create 3D objects. So in the Windows 10 Creators Update, Microsoft introduced a new application called Paint 3D. I'm going to click on that to open it. And once it's open, I want to start with a new composition, so I'm just going to click on New. Paint 3D is sort of an upgraded version of Microsoft Paint. It's all about making it easy to create artwork, even if it does not have the most complex set of features. Now I'm starting with an empty canvas, and I can see there is a series of buttons across the top here for the different categories in this application. And it starts me in the two-dimensional paint section. If you've used Microsoft Paint in the past, these tools should look fairly similar. But let's build something in 3D. I'm just going to give you a quick look and walkthrough of some of these tools. But remember, putting in the work to make something good takes more time than we have. So I'm going to switch to the 3D Objects section, and that changes my tools over here on the right. So from here, I can drop a 3D object into my canvas, and I might start with one of these pre-made 3D models, like the dog, for example. So I could click on that, and it's probably a good idea to choose a color. And then I could just click on my canvas to drop it in, but it would be better to drag diagonally across the canvas. That way I get to define the size of the object. And when I let go, I now have this 3D object in my canvas. So it's currently selected. I see the box around it, and I can see some controls. I can place my mouse somewhere in the middle, and I can move it. So I can drag it left, right, up, and down, and I can position it on my canvas. But this is a 3D object, so I've got a bunch of three-dimensional controls on the four sides of the selection box. So up here at the top, if I click down and hold and drag on this, I can rotate the object on one axis. I can go over here and drag this button, rotate it on this axis, and then of course I can rotate it on this axis. Now we saw that we can move it up, down, left, and right, but we have three-dimensional space. So this button, if I click down and hold on that, it switches me temporarily to this 3D view so that when I drag it, I'm dragging it forward and backward in Z space. So I can move it in this position as well. And when I let go, it goes back to this regular view. So there's an important component here. You will get these transform and moving tools if the object is selected. So if I click outside of it, it's no longer selected. Generally, if you click on an object, it will be selected, but to be more precise, you want to make sure that the select tool is enabled. If I click on one of these other tools and then click on my canvas, I will drop that object into the canvas. So I want to make sure that select is enabled, then I can select my object. And then I also get a bunch of other options over here on the right. I can copy and paste, I can delete it, and so on. Now also, when you're working with a three-dimensional object, you want to go down to your controls down here at the bottom. We're currently looking at the two-dimensional edit view, but if I switch over to the view in 3D mode, now I can see this in three-dimensional space. And if I click and drag on my canvas, I can move this around and look at it from different angles. But I'm not able to edit the object until I switch back to the two-dimensional edit mode. So those are some pretty important controls. All right, so I just wanted to throw the dog in here as an example. I want to build something from scratch. So I want to make sure select is enabled, select this model, hit delete, and now we can drop in something else. I could use a pre-made 3D model. I could hit this button that says get more models, and that opens up a door to Remix 3D, which is this online community where people can share their 3D models. You can set up an account, and then you can download components from Remix 3D and add them to your composition. But for now, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go back to the 3D button up here at the top. And what I want to do is I want to build a logo. And for the logo that I want to build, I want a 3D oval plate in the background. And I can easily make that starting with one of these primitive 3D objects. So I could do a cube or a sphere or a pill, but let me do a cylinder. So I'm going to click on that to select it. It's important that I choose a color before I drop it in. And then I'm going to go to my canvas. I could just click, but I think it's better to drag. That way I can define the size. This doesn't really look like a cylinder, but that's only because I'm looking at it on the side. When I let go, you'll see it sort of rotates there so I can see that it is a 3D object. And of course, I can use these transform tools to manipulate it. So I want to turn it on the side so that it looks like a circle. I want to grab the corner and resize it so it's a little bit smaller. Now I want an oval, not a circle. So what I can do is grab one of the controls on the top or bottom for resizing, squish it down a little bit, and now it is an oval. And I think it'll be cool if I rotate it just a little bit to give it sort of this perspective view. And I could rotate it from these different three-dimensional controls if I wanted to, but for now I'm going to leave it as we have it here. Next, I want to think about the look of this object. Of course, before I created it, I chose a color. But now, with the controls across the top, I can go to the next category, which is stickers. And here I could choose, these cute little stickers that I could stamp on my image, but I want to go to textures. And if you don't see a texture that you like, you could import one of your own photos. But I'm going to go with a texture. I'm going to grab the wood grain, just select it, and then I can click on my object, and then I can move this around, and I have this sticker that I could put on there. But if I make it bigger than my object, move it around, then it'll cover the entire object. So I'm going to hit the little stamp button to finalize that, and that texture has been stamped to my object. I want to go back to the select tool. That way I can select my object. And you'll see if I rotate it, I did not stamp anything on the back, so you might want to take a little bit more time to do that. But you can see how this works. I want to move on. So we've got stickers to add a texture. Then I can go to text if I want to put some text in my composition, which I do because I'm building a logo. I could do flat text or 3D text. I think 3D text will be better. So I'll select that. Then I'll go to this menu and I'll choose a font. Then I'll choose a color. And then let me make this text centered. And then I can click anywhere on the composition and then type in the text I want. So I'm going to make this text say Nick's website. And then I want to go to the select tool when I'm finished. That way I can click on it to select it. I can move it around. I can resize it, and I can do whatever I need to it. Now, if I go to the 3D view here, I can see that it's really kind of far away from that background image. So let me go back to the 2D mode. And first I want to select the background, and I'll use this Z Space controller, and I'm going to back that up to basically where the canvas is. Then I want to select my text, and I'm going to back that up so it's just touching that background object. There we go. And then I want to just sort of rotate this text. That way I can see it from the side, and I can make it thicker. If I adjust it on this axis, I can make that text thicker. Let me rotate it back, use that Z Space control again, so it's just barely touching that other object. So now when I go to the 3D view, this is what it looks like. And we're starting to get a fairly interesting 3D object here. Let me go back to the 2D view. And let's talk about some things to wrap up here. The next category will allow me to drop color filters. I'm just going to skip over that. Then I'll go to the canvas. I can change the dimensions of my canvas, but I really think the canvas is better for two-dimensional compositions. So for a three-dimensional object, I use it as a reference, but I usually like to turn the canvas off when I'm finished. Then I want to group these objects together. We saw before that we can make the selection tool active, select an object, but you can only select one object at a time. Or you can select an object, then enable multi-select, then select a second object, and now they're both selected. And I can group them together. So now that these are grouped together, when I select it, I'm selecting that group. And from here, I might want to zoom in to get this framed up. And let me zoom out just a little bit so that I can change the three-dimensional perspective on this. And I can make it sort of look kind of cool here in 3D space. And that's the logo that I want to keep. All right, so now we should talk about saving the composition when you're done. For that, you go to the menu over here on the left. And obviously you want to start by saving your project. That way you can come back to it, make changes, and export it again later. So I'm going to save this, and I'm just going to call this Nick website logo. And I'll save that project. So I can always come back and work on it later. But then I can go back to the menu and I could print it. You can see you can print it to a regular 2D printer, or if you have a 3D printer set up, you can print to that. That does get more complicated and it depends on the printer that you're using. But for now, I want to export this as an image from my website. So I'm going to go back to Save As. This time I'll choose Export. I'm going to save it on the desktop. I'll call it Nick's logo. Actually, I'll just call it Nick website logo. And I want to save it as a PNG. That is a picture file that I could put on my website. So I'll choose PNG. I'll hit Save. And if I minimize this, now I can see that logo that I created. I can double click on it. It has a transparent background, so I could put it on my website and I would see the background color on my website come through. So that was really just a whirlwind tour of the basics of working with Paint 3D. I suggest you spend more time to learn and to experiment with the different tools, and you should definitely budget even more time for actually creating some real artwork.